There were some strong opinions going around the Formula 1 paddock during the month of April, and now that the season is underway, there's a lot to talk about. As usual, I've taken to my community page to ask you, the Formula 1 fans, for your opinions on these divisive topics, and pick my top 3 to talk about in this video. Let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. Were the new regulations designed to hinder the Mercedes cars more than the other teams? The first poll from this month is the most divisive topic in my opinion, and that's whether the new floor regulations set by the FIA were designed to hinder the low-rake concept cars more than the higher-rake cars. The two teams that run a low-rake concept are Aston Martin and Mercedes, so the question was aimed at seeing whether people thought that the rules were targeted at these teams. After almost 9,200 votes, I was really surprised by the outcome, as 63% of people thought that the regulations had indeed been designed to hinder the Mercedes team, with 37% saying they were not. Personally, I don't think that the regulations could have been designed to peg these teams back, simply because most of the teams and experts didn't know who would benefit more from these new rules that are in place until we saw the cars on track. The floor rules in particular were modified with the intention of reducing the downforce of the cars by 10 to 15%. And slowing the teams down. This change, alongside a new tyre construction from Pirelli, were put in place from a safety perspective as the 2020 cars were pushing the tyres to the limit, such was the amount of downforce being produced. And this has been achieved, with Hamilton's Emilia-Romagna pole position time being roughly 8/10 slower than the pole position time set by Valtteri Bottas in October of last year. And the pole position time from Bahrain was about 1.7 seconds slower this year when compared to the last. So there's no doubt that the rules have achieved the desired outcome. But were the rules purposefully changed to slow down the Mercedes team over the others? I have my doubts, and personally I don't think it could have been the case, and here's why. Generally speaking in Formula 1, the best aerodynamicists and modellers work for the teams. When the new rules were being discussed, the teams would have run some form of analysis to work out the outcome for them and their development path. Had they known the lower rate concept was a bad route to go for this season, I reckon they would have started to make some changes in 2020 to move towards a higher rate concept, before the September homologation cut-off point. Now, as far as I'm aware, neither Mercedes or Racing Point, as they were known at the time, made any changes moving them towards a high rate concept for this season. And you can see based on their low rate concept cars for this season that they were unaware that it would be less beneficial for them until they got back on track for testing in Bahrain. So if they didn't know, then how would the rule makers? It means that the rule changes are incredibly unlikely to have been made with a particular team in mind. So that's my thoughts in a nutshell. Let's have a look at your comments on this one. In general, it was quite the debate, as you would expect, with a poll that had a number of people on both sides. Path said that they were done to reduce pressure on Pirelli, but that inevitably impacted the Mercedes cars, and this is true, but as I've mentioned, the connection to the Mercedes car is something that was unknown at the time that the regulations were revealed. This guy had a different opinion, as he said that nobody knew who would come out on top, or at least that's all that was publicly said during 2020, which I think is the key reason, as I mentioned. Blog from Max also added that some people thought that it would have more of an impact for higher rate cars, so it couldn't have been targeted at Mercedes. So overall on this one, I think the key point is that it wasn't known who would be more impacted from these regulations. So whilst it's easy to retrospectively think that they were targeted at one or two individual teams, I don't think that was the case. I'll probably have a look at this topic at some point in more detail through this season, so let me know if you'd like to see that video in the comment section below. And while you're there, make sure to hit the subscribe button as well. Should Formula 1 consider changing the points system? The next poll that I've looked at is whether Formula 1 should consider changing the points system. The reason I asked this one was because it was related to my video on why it remains unlikely that the 2021 season will go down to the wire with a final race showdown in Abu Dhabi. Within the video, I take a look at the point system in place today and look at the gap between first and second place at each race and how that's moved over the years. As you saw in the video, in my opinion, moving the second place points back towards the first place slightly could make a difference to competition throughout the season and keep the championship going further on into it. Although the primary issue here is clearly the fact that a certain team is particularly dominant. This was an interesting poll though, as after over 8,000 votes, 66% of people said no to changing the point system, with 33% in favour. This is an interesting one as the majority of people want to keep the point system as it is now. It will be interesting to see whether this changes if there were more teams added to the grid, which would therefore mean that a fewer percentage of drivers would score points at each race. In the comments there were some different suggestions and opinions. A couple of people mentioned the MotoGP point system, which I wasn't familiar with until seeing these comments. It has points for the top 15 finishers, which goes from 25 points for the winner down to 10 points for 6th, and then the points tally reducing by 1 each time down to 15th place. It's a nice system and I like the way that it doesn't offer points for all drivers, but offers enough to mean that most drivers will have a chance at points each season. It's a nice middle ground and might promote closer racing, particularly in the midfield. By far the most popular comment though was from this guy, Ganapathy, who suggests increasing the points for second place up to 20, reducing the gap between first and second place. This would help, but I think some adjustments would need to be made between second and third, and the rest respectively to be even better. But of course this is the minority of people, given the majority would prefer the system as it is now, rather than making a change. Miami 2022. The final poll I want to look at is relating to the newest race to be announced for the 2022 calendar, which is the Miami Grand Prix, the second race that will be hosted in the USA. I asked whether you were happy to see the new Miami race on the calendar, and after 9,000 votes it was an overwhelmingly positive response, with 79% of people saying they were happy to see the new race on the calendar, and 21% not happy about it. Personally, I think a new race in the USA can only be a good thing. The sport now has US owners, and growing Formula 1 in the US market can only be a good thing. At the time, there had been a track map released, and people were excited, hence the vast majority of you being in favour of the new race. A couple of days after this race weekend, Formula 1 social media accounts shared a video of the track as it had been modelled on Assetto Corsa. And well, quite frankly, it seemed to change a lot of people's opinions. I've seen all sorts of comparisons liking it to other tracks like Valencia, Sochi, Vietnam and Abu Dhabi. But whilst most of these comparisons are to tracks designed by Hermann Tilke, the Miami track is not. It's instead been designed by Apex Circuit Design, and they modelled and created 75 different layout variations at different sites before settling on this one. And even at the final chosen location, which is set next to the Hard Rock Stadium, the organisation tried 36 different track simulations. So my guess would be that whilst yes, it is a temporary track, and yes, it is a fairly narrow street circuit, I think this one may surprise people. Although, perhaps I'm just being optimistic, given there's been a 10-year deal signed. After this video, I polled my audience again, to see whether the perception had changed. And as expected, based on the comments on the Formula 1 social media post it had done, after 5,700 votes, 63% of people were still looking forward to the race in Miami, so a drop of 16%. I was surprised based on the immediate reactions that the perception was still a positive one overall, so perhaps it's the vocal minority that are writing this Grand Prix off before it's begun. As for the comments, well, on the original poll, there was this comment from August, who says that they're torn as while it looks promising, Formula 1 doesn't need another street circuit, particularly when there are other tracks like Kyalami. And it's a great point, as there are other permanent circuits that could have had this race instead. Even within the USA, there's Indianapolis and Watkins Glen for example. And whilst Watkins Glen isn't a Grade 1 circuit, it could be modified to become one. Then as August mentioned, there's Kyalami, and I would add the Buddha International Circuit in India to the list as well. You can also look at some additional tracks that made it to the 2020 F1 calendar that don't frequently host races, such as Portimao, Imola, Nürburgring and Istanbul Park, which I'm sure would all like to host races. So I think it's a great point that whilst you could continue to create new track layouts, sometimes it might be better to look at the tracks that already exist. But sadly, as is the way in Formula 1, the sport follows the money. On the second poll on the Miami Grand Prix, MemeGod made a great point, which was that it looks similar to that of Vietnam, but with the 2022 regulation cars, it could be quite good, which is another element that is unknown for this new track in Miami. If these new aero regulations do the job and encourage closer racing, then it could easily become a great track for Formula One racing, so it's a massively important point that needs to be acknowledged. And finally, I want to highlight Justin's comment, as he says that he's going to be a marshal at the event, which I think is really cool. So there are my top 3 polls from April. We've seen that most fans seem to think that the new floor regulations were purposefully designed to hinder the Mercedes team and the low-rake concept cars. We've seen that most F1 fans don't want a new point structure, and that the Miami Grand Prix is a race that most people are looking forward to. Did you think there were any surprises in these polls? Let me know in the comments, and if you've enjoyed this video and watched this far, then thanks for watching, and if you'd like to, then please leave a like and hit the subscribe button for more videos like this one in the future.